They buried Ilara Vance on a cold Tuesday in November 1874. The official coroner's report in Helena, Montana, stated she died of smoke inhalation during the Great Vance Manor fire. Her fiancé, a hardened tracker named Caleb Thorne, stood over that grave and watched his entire world turn to ash. He spent the next 5 years seeking death, taking the most dangerous bounties the West could offer, hoping a bullet would finally reunite him with her. But history has a way of burying the truth deeper than the dead. On October 14, 1879, Caleb sat in a saloon in the Badlands, waiting for a whiskey to drown the memories. He didn't know that in less than 5 minutes, 2 little girls with his eyes were about to walk through the doors and shatter reality. This isn't just a story about love. It's a story about a conspiracy that went to the highest levels of the Montana Territory. This is the legend of the ghost of Bitterroot Valley. The year was 1879. The location was a forgotten dust trap called Crossing's End, perched precariously on the edge of the Montana Territory. It was a place where men went to disappear, and no one had disappeared more thoroughly than Caleb Thorne. To the locals, he was just the Wolf. He was a man of 32, though the sun and the whiskey made him look 50. He carried a heavy Schofield revolver on his hip and a Bowie knife strapped to his thigh, a remnant of his upbringing among the Lakota people who had taken him in as an orphan before the wars drove them apart. Caleb moved with a silence that unnerved people. He didn't walk, he stalked. On this particular afternoon, the air was thick with the smell of stale beer and impending rain. The saloon, the Broken Spur, was nearly empty, save for Jude, the barkeep who knew better than to make small talk with Caleb, and a table of cattle drovers playing faro in the corner. Caleb sat at his usual table in the back, his back to the wall. He was staring at the amber liquid in his glass, but he wasn't seeing it. He was seeing her, Ilara. He saw her raven hair, the way she laughed when he tried to teach her Lakota words, and the horrific orange glow of the fire that took her. He had arrived too late. That was the nightmare that replayed every night. He had been away on a scouting job for the army, a job he took to earn enough money to buy them a ranch. While he was gone, the Vance Manor burned. The sheriff, a man named Arthur Sterling, had held Caleb back from running into the embers. "She's gone, son," Sterling had said, his voice dripping with a sympathy Caleb later realized was false. "There's nothing left but bone." Since that day, Caleb Thorne had died. The man sitting in the saloon was just a husk, fueled by violence and grief. The swinging doors of the saloon creaked open. The sound was distinct, not the heavy shove of a drunkard, but a hesitant, slow push. The light from the street cut through the gloom, revealing a silhouette. Then another. The room went quiet. Even the drovers stopped their game. Standing in the doorway were 2 children, twin girls, no older than 4 years old. They were dressed in travel-stained pinafores that had once been fine lace, now grey with the dust of the trail. They held hands, their knuckles white with fear. Jude, the barkeep, leaned over the counter. "You lost, little ones? This ain't a place for children." The girl on the left stepped forward. She had dark hair, wild and curly, just like Ilara's, but it was her eyes that made the air leave Caleb's lungs. One eye was a deep, earthen brown. The other was a startling, icy blue. Heterochromia. Caleb froze. His hand hovered over his glass. Ilara didn't have mismatched eyes, but Caleb did. It was the mark that had made the superstitious in town call him a devil, and the Lakota call him Waniatu Wangbli, Winter Eagle. The little girl scanned the room, ignoring the staring men. Her gaze swept past the bar, past the faro table, and locked onto the dark figure in the back corner. She tugged her sister's hand. They began to walk. The sound of their small boots on the floorboards was the only noise in the world. Caleb couldn't breathe. He wanted to stand, to run, to scream at them to stop looking at him with those eyes. But he was paralyzed. They stopped 3 feet from his table. Up close, he saw they were exhausted, their faces smudged with dirt, looking thin and hungry. But there was a defiance in their chins that he recognized. It was the same look Elara gave him when he told her their love was too dangerous. The girl with the mismatched eyes reached into her pocket. She pulled out a piece of paper, folded and refolded 100 times until it was soft as fabric. She held it out to him. "Mama said you would know," she whispered. Her voice was trembling, but clear. Caleb's voice was a rusted grate. "Know what?" The second girl, the one with both eyes brown, spoke up. "That you're our daddy." The word daddy hit the room like a gunshot. One of the drovers at the faro table laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Well, look at that, Wolf. Looks like your pups tracked you down." Caleb stood up so fast his chair clattered backward, hitting the floor with a bang. The drover shut his mouth instantly. Caleb's hand was nowhere near his gun, but the violence radiating off him was palpable. "This is a bad joke," Caleb snarled, looking down at the girls. "Who sent you? Was it Sterling? Is this some game?" The girls flinched, stepping back, but they didn't run. The brave one, the one with his eyes, shook her head. "No game. Mama said—" "Mama is dead," Caleb roared. The grief he had bottled up for 5 years exploded. "She died 5 years ago. You're 4. Maybe 5. The math doesn't work. Get out." He turned away, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. "It's impossible," he told himself. "Elara died in 74. These girls were born in 75, maybe late 74. If Elara was pregnant when she died— No, she would have told me. She said you'd be angry," the girl said to his back. "She said the fire made you angry." Caleb stopped. Slowly he turned back around. "What did you say?" "The fire," the girl repeated. "She said you think the fire took her." But she said the fire was a cover. Caleb fell to his knees. He was eye level with them now. He ignored the whispers of the men in the bar. He looked at the girl's hands. "Give me the paper." She handed it to him. Caleb unfolded it with shaking fingers. It wasn't a letter. It was a deed. A land deed for a small plot of worthless rock in the Badlands, signed by Elara Vance. But it wasn't the deed that caught his eye. It was what was wrapped inside it. A silver locket. Caleb gasped. He snatched the locket up. It was tarnished black, but he knew the weight of it. He had won this locket in a poker game in Cheyenne and given it to Elara on the night he proposed. He had engraved it himself, using the tip of his knife. He pried it open. Inside there was no picture. Instead, there was a lock of coarse, black hair, his hair, and a tiny inscription scratched into the soft silver, "To the stars and back," his secret promise to her. No one else knew those words. Not Sterling, not the town gossip, just him and Elara. "Where is she?" Caleb whispered, his voice breaking. "Where is your mother?" "The bad man took her," the brown-eyed sister said, tears finally spilling over. "The man with the silver cane. He put her in the wagon with the bars. He said she was sick in the head. Sister Mary stole us. She told us to run to Crossing's End. She said, 'Find the wolf.'" "Sister Mary?" Caleb asked. "The lady at the orphanage," the girl explained. "She died yesterday. She told us to run before the man with the cane came back." Caleb's mind was racing, connecting dots that had been invisible for 5 years. The man with the silver cane, Arthur Sterling, the sheriff, the man who had held Caleb back from the fire, the man who had identified the body. He had been elected governor of the territory last year, running on a platform of civilizing the West. He walked with a silver-tipped cane due to a war injury. Sterling had told Caleb that Ilara died instantly. But if these girls were his, if Ilara had survived— "What are your names?" Caleb asked, his voice softening for the first time in half a decade. "I'm Rose," said the one with the mismatched eyes. "She's Lily." Western flower names. Ilara loved her garden. Caleb looked at Rose, then at Lily. He saw the curve of Ilara's nose, the shape of her chin, and he saw his own eyes looking back at him from Rose's face. A cold, deadly clarity washed over him. The drunk, grieving drifter died in that moment. The Lakota-trained warrior, the tracker, the wolf, returned. He stood up and holstered the locket. He looked at Jude behind the bar. "Jude, give the girls a warm meal. Put it on my tab." "You ain't got no tab, Caleb. You drank it dry," Jude said nervously. Caleb reached into his vest and pulled out a gold nugget, the last of his savings from a bounty in Colorado. He slammed it onto the wood. "Feed them. Give them the room upstairs. Keep the door locked. If anyone asks, they aren't here." "Where you going, Caleb?" Jude asked, eyeing the gold. Caleb checked the cylinder of his revolver. 6 rounds. He snapped it shut. "I'm going to visit a grave," Caleb said, his voice dropping to a low growl. "And then I'm going to have a conversation with the governor." He turned to the girls. He didn't know how to be a father. He didn't know how to be soft. But he knelt down one last time and brushed a stray curl from Rose's forehead. "You stay here," he commanded gently. "I have to go find out if ghosts can bleed." Caleb turned and walked out of the saloon. The sun had set, and the rain had started to fall, turning the dust to mud. He mounted his horse, a massive black roan named Shadow, and turned him north, toward the old Vance Manor ruins, toward the cemetery. He had to know. He had to dig up that coffin. If Ilara was alive, then whose bones were in that box? And why had Arthur Sterling spent 5 years building a political empire on top of Caleb's tragedy? As he rode out of town, a flash of lightning illuminated the ridge. Far in the distance, watching through a brass spyglass, a rider in a long duster turned his horse around. The spy was already moving to alert Sterling. The wolf was awake, and the hunt had just begun. The ride to the Vance family cemetery was a journey through the throat of the storm. The rain had turned from a drizzle into a torrential downpour, turning the trail into a sludge of clay and shale. Thunder rolled across the Bitterroot Valley, shaking the ground with the same violence that shook Caleb's hands as he gripped the reins. The cemetery sat on a lonely hill overlooking the charred remains of the Vance Manor. The ruins of the house were still there, overgrown now with creeping ivy and thorny brush, a black scar on the landscape. Caleb refused to look at the house. He guided Shadow to the iron gates of the graveyard, the hinges screaming in protest as he forced them open. He dismounted, his boots sinking inches into the mud. He unstrapped the shovel from his saddlebag. It was a tool for trenching, not for exhumation, but it would have to do. He walked to the headstone. It was marble, paid for by Arthur Sterling. Ilara Vance Thorne, beloved daughter. 1853-1874. Resting in the arms of angels, Caleb stared at the name. For 5 years he had come here to talk to the dirt. He had poured whiskey onto this grass. He had slept curled up at the foot of this stone when the nightmares were too loud to bear. "If you're down there, Ilara," Caleb whispered, the rain matting his dark hair to his skull, "forgive me for disturbing your sleep. But if you aren't—" He struck the earth. The sound of metal hitting wet soil was dull and heavy. He dug with a manic rhythm. 1 scoop, 2 scoops. The mud fought him, clinging to the blade, heavy and slick. His shoulders burned. His breath came in ragged gasps. He dug until he was waist-deep in the grave, the walls of earth towering around him like a prison. An hour passed. Then 2. The storm raged, lightning illuminating the grim task in strobe light flashes. Thud. The shovel hit wood. Caleb froze. He wiped the mud from his eyes and fell to his knees in the muck. He scraped the remaining dirt away with his bare hands, his fingernails tearing, until the lid of the pine casket was exposed. It was warped from 5 years of rot, but the seal held. He jammed the blade of the shovel under the lid and levered his weight against it. The wood groaned, a high-pitched shriek of rusty nails giving way, with a final, guttural roar of effort. Caleb wrenched the lid open. A flash of lightning tore the sky open at that exact moment, bathing the interior of the coffin in stark, white light. Caleb recoiled, slamming his back against the dirt wall of the grave. There was no skeleton. There was no decaying silk dress. The coffin was filled with bricks. Red, clay bricks, the kind used in the construction of the new state house. Wrapped around them were burlap sacks of sand to simulate the weight of a body, and on top of the bricks, mocking him, was a single object. It wasn't a personal token, it was a branding iron. The tip was rusted, but the shape was unmistakable. The double S, the Sterling Syndicate. Caleb stared at the iron. It was a message left 5 years ago by the men who buried this box. They knew no one would ever dig it up. It was a signature of ownership. They hadn't just killed Ilara, they had erased her and replaced her with construction waste. She's alive, Caleb breathed. The realization hit him harder than a bullet. The grief that had defined him, the whiskey that had drowned him, it was all based on a lie. Ilara wasn't dead. She was stolen. He wasn't a widower. He was a husband who had failed to protect his wife. A twig snapped. It wasn't the wind. It was the distinct crack of a boot on dry wood, the sound of someone trying to be quiet and failing on the wet terrain. Caleb didn't stand up. He didn't gasp. The wolf instincts took over instantly. He remained crouched in the grave, his hand moving to the Schofield revolver in his shoulder holster. "Impressive digging, Thorne," a voice called out from the darkness above. Most men would have let the dead lie. Caleb recognized the voice. Elias Harker, a hired gun for the cattle barons, a man known for scalping his bounties even though he wasn't native. He was a sadist who wore a long duster coat and carried a sawed-off shotgun. "I'm not most men, Elias," Caleb shouted back, his voice echoing from the hole. "No," Elias chuckled. "You're a tragic hero. Governor Sterling thought you'd drink yourself to death in a year. When the spy told us you were talking to those brats in the saloon, Sterling got worried. He hates loose ends. Those brats are my daughters," Caleb said, his thumb pulling back the hammer of his gun. "Are they?" Elias mused. "Shame. They won't live to see sunrise. My boys are already halfway to the broken spur. I'm just here to put you back in the hole you dug." The sound of a shotgun racking a shell echoed. Caleb didn't wait. He didn't try to climb out. He threw the shovel straight up into the air, spinning it like a tomahawk. Elias, startled by the flying object, fired blindly into the grave. The buckshot whistled harmlessly over Caleb's head, slamming into the mud wall. In the split second of Elias's distraction, Caleb vaulted out of the grave. He moved with the desperate speed of a cornered animal. He caught the edge of the grass and hauled himself up, mud slicking his movements. Elias was reloading. He looked up, eyes widening as the mud-caked demon rose from the earth. Caleb fired. The shot took Elias in the shoulder, spinning him around. The shotgun fell into the open grave. Elias stumbled, reaching for his belt knife, but Caleb was already on him. Caleb tackled the mercenary, driving him into the mud. They rolled among the headstones, a tangle of limbs and fury. Elias was strong, but Caleb was possessed. Caleb slammed Elias's head against the base of Ilara's fake tombstone. "Where is she?" Caleb roared, pressing the barrel of his hot revolver against Elias's forehead. "Where is Ilara?" Elias laughed, blood bubbling from his mouth. You think you can stop it? The governor owns this territory. He owns the law. He owns the asylum." "The asylum," Caleb repeated. "Blackwood?" Elias's eyes flickered with surprise. "Smart wolf. Yeah, Blackwood, where they put the hysterical women. She's been rotting there in the dark, Thorn. Probably doesn't even know her name anymore." Caleb stood up. He looked down at the man who had helped steal 5 years of his life. "And the girls?" Caleb asked coldly. "Like I said," Elias wheezed. "The Skinner brothers are paying them a visit. You're too late." Caleb didn't say another word. He holstered his gun and kicked Elias hard in the temple, knocking him unconscious. He wouldn't kill him. Not yet. He needed a witness later. He whistled for Shadow. The horse trotted over, nervous from the gunfire. Caleb swung into the saddle, the mud flying from his coat. "Hold on, Rose. Hold on, Lily," he whispered into the wind. He dug his spurs into Shadow's flanks. The horse screamed and bolted down the hill. Caleb rode not like a man, but like a force of nature, racing the storm back to Crossing's End. Crossing's End was quiet. Too quiet. The rain had driven everyone indoors, and the shutters were drawn tight on every building. Inside the broken spur, the mood was suffocating. Jude had locked the front doors and barred them with a heavy oak plank. He had blown out the oil lamps, leaving the saloon in shadows. Behind the bar, Rose and Lily were sitting on a crate of whiskey, huddled together under a rough wool blanket. Rose was clutching the silver locket Caleb had returned to her. "Is he coming back?" Lily whispered, her voice trembling. "He promised," Rose said, though her eyes, one brown, one blue, darted nervously toward the door. "He has the eyes of a wolf. Wolves protect their pack." Jude checked his double-barreled shotgun for the 10th time. He was sweating, despite the chill. He wasn't a fighter. He was a man who poured drinks and broke up fistfights. But he looked at the 2 little girls, and he remembered the gold nugget Caleb had slammed on the counter. More than that, he remembered Ilara Vance. She had been kind to him once, years ago, when he was broke and starving. "Stay down, little ones," Jude whispered. "Whatever you hear, don't make a sound." From outside came the sound of horses, 3 of them. They moved slowly, the hooves clopping heavily in the mud. They stopped right in front of the saloon. "Open up, Jude," a voice called out. It was a gravelly, cheerful voice. That made it worse. It was corrupted cheer. "Closed for the night, Skinner," Jude shouted back, his voice cracking slightly. Now, we know you got guests," Skinner replied. "2 little runaways from the orphanage. The governor is very concerned for their welfare. Send 'em out and we'll ride on." "They ain't here," Jude lied. "Don't lie to me, barkeep. I can smell 'em." A heavy silence followed. Then the sound of glass breaking. A Molotov cocktail, a rag stuffed in a whiskey bottle, smashed through the front window. Flames erupted on the floorboards, licking at the dry wood of the tables. "Fire!" Lily screamed. "Get back!" Jude yelled. He grabbed a bucket of water from the dishwashing basin and threw it on the flames, dousing them, but smoke filled the room. Crash! The front door splintered inward. A massive boot had kicked it near the lock. Another kick, and the bar fell away. 3 men walked in. The Skinner brothers. They were big, bearded men wearing long yellow dusters. They held repeating rifles. Jude leveled his shotgun. "Get out!" The lead brother, a man with a missing ear, grinned. He didn't even aim. He just fired from the hip. Bang! The bullet caught Jude in the shoulder, spinning him around. He dropped the shotgun and fell behind the bar, groaning in agony. "Jude!" Rose cried out. She scrambled to him, trying to press her small hands against the bleeding wound. The Skinner brothers walked in, their spurs jingling. They stepped over the debris. "Well, ain't they precious?" the lead Skinner said, looking over the bar at the two girls. "Twins. Double the bounty." He reached out a gloved hand to grab Rose by her hair. Rose didn't scream. She bit him. She sank her teeth into his gloved hand with all the fury of a wild animal. "Gah! You little rat!" Skinner yelled. He raised the butt of his rifle to strike her. The saloon doors swung open again. But this time, they didn't creak. They slammed against the walls with the force of a hurricane. Lightning flashed behind the figure standing in the doorway. He was dripping wet, covered in grave mud, his face a mask of absolute, terrifying rage. Caleb Thorne had returned. The Skinner brothers turned. They barely had time to widen their eyes. Caleb didn't speak. He moved. He drew the Schofield with his right hand and the Bowie knife with his left. Bang! Bang! 2 shots rang out instantly. The first Skinner brother dropped, a hole in his chest. The second brother, the one who had shot Jude, took a bullet to the knee and collapsed screaming. The leader, the one who had tried to hit Rose, swung his rifle toward Caleb. Caleb was too fast. He closed the distance in 3 strides, batting the rifle barrel aside with his forearm. He drove the Bowie knife into the man's shoulder, pinning him to the wooden pillar of the saloon. The man screamed, dropping his weapon. Caleb leaned in close, his face inches from the mercenary. "You touched her." "I was just following orders," the man sputtered, his eyes bulging with pain. "Orders are for soldiers," Caleb growled. "You're just meat." Caleb ripped the knife out and pistol-whipped the man across the jaw, knocking him out cold. The room fell silent, save for the whimpering of the man with the shattered knee and the crackle of the dying fire. Caleb holstered his weapons. He walked slowly behind the bar. Rose and Lily were huddled over Jude. The barkeep was pale, breathing shallowly. "Daddy," Rose whispered. Caleb felt his heart fracture and reform. He dropped to his knees. He ignored the blood on his hands and pulled both girls into his chest. They buried their faces in his wet coat, sobbing. "I'm here," Caleb said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm here. I got you. Nobody touches you again." He looked at Jude. The barkeep managed a weak smile. Did I do good, Wolf?" Jude wheezed. "You did good, Jude," Caleb said. He looked around the room. He grabbed a bottle of high-proof whiskey and a clean rag. "Rose, hold this on his shoulder. Press hard. I need to tie these men up." Caleb moved with efficiency. He bound the surviving mercenaries with rope from the stables. He dragged them into the center of the room. He then turned back to his daughters. They looked at him with awe and fear. They had seen violence, but they had also seen salvation. "We can't stay here," Caleb said. "More will come. Sterling knows you're here." "Where do we go?" Lily asked. Caleb looked out the window at the storm. "We go to the one place they won't look. And then we go to get your mother." They rode through the night, 3 on 1 horse. Caleb kept shadow at a steady pace, heading west into the rocky foothills of the Sapphire Mountains. Rose sat in front of him, Caleb's arms forming a protective cage around her, holding the reins. Lily clung to his back, tied securely with his belt so she wouldn't fall if she dozed off. By dawn, the rain had stopped. The world was grey and misty. They arrived at a small, secluded homestead nestled in a box canyon. Smoke rose from the chimney. This was the home of Martha Higgins. Martha was a 60-year-old widow who ran a small goat farm. 10 years ago, Caleb had saved her herd from rustlers. She was the only person in the territory he trusted implicitly. Caleb rode up to the porch. Martha came out with a scattergun, but lowered it when she saw the rider. "Caleb Thorne," she said, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt. "You look like hell dug up and spit out." "Close enough, Martha," Caleb said, swinging down and helping the girls off. Martha's hard eyes softened when she saw the twins. "Well, Lord have mercy. Who are these angels?" "My daughters," Caleb said. The words felt more natural now. "I need you to keep them safe. For 2 days. Maybe 3. "And where are you going?" Martha asked, ushering the shivering girls inside toward the fire. "I have to go to Blackwood," Caleb said quietly. Martha froze. She turned slowly. "The asylum?" "Caleb, that place is a fortress. It's where Sterling sends the people he wants forgotten. Rumor is, they do things to the patients there. Cut pieces out of their brains." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Elara is in there, Martha. She's been there for 5 years. Martha crossed herself. "Sweet Jesus, I thought she burned." "We all did," Caleb said. He checked his guns. He took the ammunition belt off the mercenary he had captured and slung it over his shoulder. He looked like a war machine. "I'm going to burn it down, Martha. But I need to know the girls are safe." "They're safe," Martha vowed. "Nobody comes up this canyon without me knowing. I'll fill 'em with buckshot and prayers." Caleb knelt before the girls. They were drinking warm goat's milk by the fire. "I have to go away for a little bit," he told them. "To get Mama?" Rose asked. "Yes, to get Mama." "Kill the bad man," Rose said. Her voice was flat, devoid of childish innocence. It broke Caleb's heart to hear it. "I will," Caleb promised. He mounted Shadow again. He didn't look back. He couldn't. If he looked back, he would stay. The ride to Blackwood Sanatorium took the better part of the day. It was located on a cliff edge, overlooking the rushing Missouri River. It was a massive Gothic structure made of grey stone, surrounded by a 12-foot brick wall, topped with iron spikes. Caleb didn't approach the front gate. He wasn't going to knock. He rode to the tree line about a mile out. He tethered Shadow and covered him with brush. He then proceeded on foot, moving through the undergrowth like a phantom. He reached the perimeter wall as the sun began to set. He scouted the area. There were guards patrolling the grounds, men with rifles, not doctors. This wasn't a hospital, it was a prison camp. He found a drainage grate near the base of the wall. It was rusted and small, but big enough for a man if he didn't mind crawling through sewage. Caleb didn't mind. He had crawled through worse in the Indian Wars. He pried the grate open and slipped inside. The smell was atrocious, a mix of waste and chemical runoff. He crawled for what felt like miles, the darkness pressing in on him. Finally, he saw light above. He pushed up a manhole cover and emerged in the courtyard of the asylum. He was inside. He stayed in the shadows, moving from pillar to pillar. He needed to find the records room or the isolation ward. Elias had said she was in the dark. That meant the basement, or the solitary wing. He knocked out a passing orderly, dragging him into the bushes. He stole the man's white coat and keys. It was a tight fit, but it covered his guns. He entered the main building. The screams hit him first. Distant, muffled wails of the tormented. The air smelled of carbolic acid and stale cabbage. He walked with purpose, head down. He found a stairwell leading down. Maximum security ward. He descended. The air grew colder. The cells here had solid metal doors with tiny sliding viewports. He checked the first one. An old man rocking back and forth. He checked the second. A woman screaming at invisible spiders. He walked to the end of the hall. Cell 42. There was no name on the door. Just a red tag. Do not interact. Ward of the state. Caleb's hand trembled as he slid the viewport open. The cell was dark. In the corner, huddled on a thin mattress, sat a figure. She was thin, painfully thin. Her hair, once a glossy raven mane, was chopped short and grey with filth. She was scratching at the stone wall with a spoon, murmuring to herself. "Elara?" Caleb whispered. The figure stopped scratching. She didn't turn around. "No," she croaked. Her voice was raspy, unused. "No Elara here, only 42. Go away, doctor. I took my medicine." "Elara, it's me," Caleb said, tears streaming down his face. "It's Caleb, it's the wolf." Slowly, agonizingly, she turned. Her face was gaunt. Her eyes were sunken. But when those eyes met his through the slit in the door, a spark ignited. A flicker of recognition in the abyss of madness. "Caleb?" she whispered. She stumbled toward the door, her chains rattling. You died in the fire. They told me. They showed me your bones." "They lied," Caleb said, fumbling with the keys. "They lied about everything." He found the key. He jammed it into the lock. The tumblers clicked. He swung the door open. Elara collapsed into his arms. She felt frail, like a bird made of glass. Caleb held her tight, burying his face in her neck. She smelled of sickness and despair, but underneath that, she smelled like her. "I have the girls," Caleb whispered into her ear. "Rose and Lily. I found them. They're safe." Elara sobbed, a sound of pure, raw relief. "My babies. Oh God, my babies." "We're leaving," Caleb said. "Now." "We can't," Elara gasped, clutching his coat. "Sterling is here. He's upstairs. He comes once a month to gloat. He's having a dinner with the director." Caleb's eyes went cold. The sadness evaporated, replaced by a burning, white-hot fury. "Sterling is here?" Caleb asked. "Yes, with his guards." Caleb gently pulled away from Elara. He took off the white coat, revealing his holster. He checked his Schofield. He spun the cylinder. "Can you walk?" he asked her. "Yes," she said, finding strength in his presence. "Good," Caleb said. He took her hand. "We're going out the front door. And I'm going to introduce the governor to the ghost of Bitterroot Valley." He led her out of the cell. They began to climb the stairs, not toward the exit, but toward the dining hall, toward the man with the silver cane. The wolf had found his mate. Now he was going to eat the hunter. The staircase leading from the bowels of Blackwood Sanatorium to the upper administrative wing was a transition between two worlds. Below, there was only darkness, filth, and the screams of the forgotten. Above, the gas lamps burned bright, casting a warm, golden glow on polished mahogany banisters and velvet runners. Caleb Thorne moved up the stairs with his gun drawn, his steps heavy but silent. He was a walking bruise, his body battered from the fight in the graveyard and the shootout at the saloon. But adrenaline was a potent drug. Beside him, Elara moved like a phantom. She was weak, her legs trembling from years of atrophy. But her hand gripped Caleb's belt with a strength born of desperation. She wasn't just escaping a prison, she was ascending to confront the devil who had built it. "Wait," Caleb whispered as they reached the landing. Through the double oak doors of the director's dining hall, the sound of clinking crystal and laughter drifted out. It was a surreal, sickening sound. While women wept in chains 40 feet below, men were drinking brandy and smoking cigars above. "He's in there," Elara hissed, her eyes wide and dilated. "I can smell his cologne, sandalwood and gunpowder." Caleb checked the cylinder of his Schofield. 3 rounds left. He checked the magazine of the captured pistol tucked in his belt. Full. "Stay behind me," Caleb commanded. "When the shooting starts, get low and don't move until I say." "No," Elara said, her voice raspy but firm. She reached into the pocket of the stolen orderly's coat Caleb was wearing, and pulled out a scalpel he had swiped from a medical tray in the hallway. Her hand shook, but her grip was white-knuckled. "I am not a ghost anymore, Caleb. I am a mother. And I want to look him in the eye." Caleb looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the steel that had allowed her to survive 5 years of solitude. He nodded. He raised his boot and kicked the doors open. The room froze. It was a scene of grotesque opulence. A long table was laden with roasted pheasant, bottles of imported wine, and silver platters of fruit. Seated at the head of the table was Governor Arthur Sterling. He was older now, his hair silvered, his face lined with the stress of ruling a lawless territory. His silver-tipped cane leaned against his chair. To his right sat Dr. Orris, the director of the asylum. 2 armed guards stood by the fireplace. Sterling had a glass of wine halfway to his lips. He lowered it slowly, annoyed by the interruption, expecting a servant. "What is the meaning of—" Sterling began. Then he saw the mud-caked, bloodied figure of the wolf, and behind him, the gaunt, grey-skinned woman in rags. The glass slipped from Sterling's fingers. It shattered on the floor, the red wine spreading like a blood-stain on the Persian rug. "Impossible," Sterling whispered. His face drained of colour. He looked as if he were seeing his own death manifest. "Evening, Arthur," Caleb said, his voice low and deadly. "I believe you have something of mine." "Guards!" Dr. Orris shrieked, knocking over his chair. The 2 guards by the fireplace scrambled for their rifles. They were slow, drunk on the governor's wine and complacent in their fortress. Caleb didn't hesitate. He fired 2 shots from the Schofield. The first guard took a bullet to the shoulder, spinning him into the mantel. The second guard managed to raise his rifle, but Caleb's second shot shattered the wood of the stock, sending splinters into the man's face. He fell back, blindingly firing a round into the ceiling. "Don't move!" Caleb roared, leveling the gun at Sterling. Sterling didn't move. He didn't reach for a weapon. He just stared at Ilara. "Ilara!" Sterling breathed, a twisted mixture of reverence and horror on his face. You shouldn't be out. You're sick. The fire." "There was no fire, Arthur," Ilara screamed. She stepped out from behind Caleb, her frail body vibrating with rage. "You burned my house. You killed my parents. You stole my life." "I saved you," Sterling shouted, standing up and leaning heavily on the table. "I saved you from a life of dirt and poverty with him. I kept you safe. I preserved you." "You put me in a cage," Ilara spat. "I kept you pristine," Sterling countered, his eyes wild. "I built this territory for you. Every railroad, every town, every hanging. It was all to build a kingdom worthy of you. And you chose a savage." Caleb stepped forward, the gun trained on Sterling's heart. "It's over, Arthur. The girls are safe. The Skinner brothers are dead. Elias is broken. Your empire is done." Sterling laughed. It was a dry, rattling sound. "Done? I am the governor. I am the law. You think you can just walk out of here? There are 50 men outside the walls. You're trapped." "I'm not trapped," Caleb said. "I'm the wolf. I don't get trapped. I hunt." Suddenly, Dr. Arris, who had been cowering under the table, lunged. He held a small derringer he had pulled from his boot. "No!" Ilara screamed. She threw herself at the doctor. It was a clumsy, desperate tackle. She drove the scalpel down. She didn't have the strength to kill, but she buried the blade in the doctor's forearm. Arris screamed and dropped the gun. The distraction was enough. Sterling grabbed his heavy silver cane. He didn't use it to walk. He twisted the handle, revealing it was a sheath for a long, thin rapier blade. He lunged across the table at Caleb. Caleb fired his last round. Click! Empty. Sterling thrust the blade. It caught Caleb in the left shoulder, piercing the muscle. Caleb grunted, dropping the empty revolver. He grabbed Sterling's wrist with his right hand, halting the blade. They grappled over the table, scattering plates and wine bottles. Sterling was strong, fueled by madness. Caleb was exhausted, fueled by vengeance. "You should have died in the grave I dug for you," Sterling snarled, spitting in Caleb's face. "I don't die easy," Caleb grunted. He head-butted Sterling. The sound of breaking cartilage echoed in the room. Sterling stumbled back, blood gushing from his nose. Caleb ripped the sword cane from Sterling's grip and tossed it aside. He drew his bowie knife. But before he could strike, the door to the hallway burst open. 3 more guards, alerted by the gunfire, rushed in. "Get down!" Caleb yelled to Ilara. He grabbed the heavy dining table and flipped it on its side, creating a barricade just as the guards opened fire. Bullets chewed into the mahogany, sending splinters flying. "Burn it," Caleb said to Ilara, crouching behind the table. "What?" "The curtains." Caleb pointed to the heavy velvet drapes near them. "If we can't shoot our way out, we smoke them out." Ilara grabbed a fallen oil lamp. She looked at the drapes. Then she looked at Sterling, who was cowering behind the guards. "Burn it all," she whispered. She threw the lamp. The glass shattered against the fabric. The oil ignited instantly. The flames roared up the wall, catching the dry wood of the paneling. "Fire! Fire!" The guards shouted, falling back as the heat became intense. "Move!" Caleb grabbed Ilara's hand. They didn't go for the main door. They ran for the balcony doors behind the table. Caleb smashed the glass with his elbow. They stumbled out into the cold night air. They were on the 2nd floor, overlooking the cliffs and the roaring river below. Behind them, the dining room was an inferno. The fire was spreading fast, fed by the old timber and the chemicals stored in the asylum. "There's nowhere to go," Ilara cried, looking over the railing at the jagged rocks below. "We don't go down," Caleb said, looking up. "We go up." He pointed to a trellis of thick ivy growing up the stone wall to the roof. It was precarious, but it was their only path. "Climb," Caleb ordered. As Ilara began to pull herself up, the balcony door crashed open. Arthur Sterling stumbled out, coughing, his fine suit singed. He held a revolver he had taken from a guard. "You aren't taking her!" Sterling screamed. He raised the gun. Caleb didn't have a gun. He didn't have time to throw his knife. He stepped in front of Ilara, shielding her body with his own. Bang! The bullet hit Caleb in the chest. The impact knocked Caleb backward, slamming him against the stone railing. Pain, white and hot, exploded in his chest. He gasped, tasting copper. "Caleb!" Ilara screamed, dropping from the ivy. "No! Keep climbing!" Caleb wheezed, sliding down to a sitting position. He pressed his hand to his chest. It came away dark and slick. Sterling staggered forward, the fire from the room behind him, framing him like a demon. He cocked the hammer for a second shot. "It ends how it should have ended 5 years ago," Sterling sneered. "With you dead and her mine." He aimed at Caleb's head. Caleb looked up. His vision was blurring. He saw the fire. He saw the smoke. And he saw something else. Ilara wasn't climbing. She had picked up a heavy stone gargoyle head that had broken off the railing during the fight. She stood behind Sterling. She didn't look like a victim. She looked like a Valkyrie. "Arthur!" she shouted. Sterling turned. Ilara swung the stone with every ounce of strength she possessed. It smashed into the side of Sterling's head with a sickening crunch. Sterling didn't scream. His eyes just rolled back. He crumpled sideways, hitting the railing. His momentum carried him over. He fell. There was no sound of impact, just the roar of the river swallowing him whole below. The governor of Montana, the man who owned the law, was gone. Ilara dropped the stone. She fell to her knees beside Caleb. "Caleb, stay with me. Please, stay with me," she sobbed, pressing her hands over his wound. Caleb looked at her. He smiled, his teeth stained with blood. I told you, I'd come back. You have to live, she cried. Rose and Lily, they're waiting. Caleb coughed. The pocket. My vest. Ilara reached into his vest pocket. She felt something hard. She pulled it out. It was the thick, leather-bound journal he always carried, his bounty log. The bullet was lodged in the center of the book. It had punched through the leather, through 200 pages of names and dates, and stopped against the metal backing of the binding. It hadn't pierced his heart. It had broken a rib, maybe two, but the book had saved him. Caleb took a ragged breath, wincing in pain. Real life isn't like the stories. Sometimes bad aim helps. He groaned and forced himself to stand, leaning heavily on Ilara. The building is going to collapse, Caleb said, looking at the inferno consuming the asylum. We have to move. They climbed the ivy to the roof, then crossed to the adjacent wing, which was still clear of fire. They found a maintenance ladder leading down the outer wall, away from the chaos of the front courtyard, where the fire brigade was finally arriving. They reached the tree line where Shadow was tethered. The horse nickered softly, sensing Caleb. Caleb struggled into the saddle, then pulled Ilara up behind him. She wrapped her arms around his waist, burying her face in his back. They rode away as the Blackwood Sanatorium burned, a beacon of orange light illuminating the night sky. They didn't stop to watch it fall. They had a destination. 2 days later, at Martha Higgins's goat farm in the Box Canyon. Rose and Lily were sitting on the porch, braiding a goat's hair, when they heard the hoofbeats. They looked up. Caleb rode into the yard. He was bandaged, pale, and moving stiffly. But he wasn't alone. The woman sitting behind him slid off the horse. She was clean now, wearing one of Martha's simple calico dresses. Her hair was short, but her eyes were bright. The girls stood up. They dropped their toys. "Mama," Lily whispered. Ilara fell to her knees in the dust, opening her arms wide. "My loves," she cried. "My sweet, sweet loves." The girls ran. They hit her with the force of cannonballs, knocking her back, burying her in a tangle of hugs and tears. Caleb watched from the saddle. He felt a hand on his leg. It was Martha. "You did it, Wolf," she said softly. "You actually did it." "We can't stay, Martha," Caleb said, his voice grave. "Sterling is dead. The law will come. They won't care that he was a monster. They'll only care that I killed a governor." "I know," Martha said. She handed him a heavy sack. "Dried meat, cheese, and fresh horses are saddled in the back. Go west, over the bitter roots into Idaho, maybe Oregon. Lose the name Thorn." Caleb nodded. "Thank you, Martha." He dismounted and walked over to his family. Ilara looked up at him, tears streaming down her face, holding a daughter in each arm. "We have to go," Caleb said gently. "I know," Ilara said. She stood up. She didn't look back at the life she lost. She looked at the man who had walked through hell to find her. "I'm ready." They mounted the fresh horses. Caleb took Rose, Ilara took Lily. As they rode out of the canyon, Caleb paused at the ridge. He looked back at the Montana territory one last time. He took the silver badge he had once worn as an army scout from his pocket. He looked at it, then tossed it into the tall grass. Caleb Thorne died that day. The wolf died that day. What remained was just a father, a husband, and a mystery. Historians still argue about what happened that night in 1879. The official records state that Governor Sterling died heroically, trying to save patients from the fire. They say Caleb Thorne was a madman who perished in the flames. But in the oral histories of the Nez Perce and the diary entries of settlers in Oregon, there are stories of a family that appeared from nowhere in the 1880s. A man with a scar and a woman with sad eyes who raised twin girls on a ranch near the coast. They say the man never carried a gun again, but no one ever dared to cross his fence line. The truth is, history is written by the victors, but legends are written by the survivors. Caleb Thorne didn't just save his wife, he defeated the inevitable. He proved that even in the Wild West, death is not the end of the story. Sometimes it's just a cover for a new beginning. If this story gave you chills, if you believe that justice sometimes has to be taken by force, hit that like button right now. It helps us find more lost legends of the West. Do you think Caleb was right to take the law into his own hands? Or should he have tried to expose Sterling in court? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Next week, we're digging into the mystery of the lost gold of the Confederacy and the one man who knows where it's buried. You don't want to miss it. Stay wild, and I'll see you on the trail.